Peace. This is Jamal Robinson with 720astrology.com. Today's date is May 26th, 2024. At the time of recording this, it is 10:49 p.m. Central Standard Time. Per usual, I'm a day late on the actual transit, but it's still worth discussing. And that is Jupiter's ingress into Gemini. It actually happened yesterday, May 25th at 6:15 p.m. Central Standard Time. It entered Gemini. So in this discussion, I want to look at first just the rudimentary basic astrology around dealing with the aspects and the energy around this ingress. And then we're going to pan out and we're going to look at the historical timeline. And we're going to move from 1988 up to 2032. And this will make sense when I get into it. But first, let me pull up the chart for the actual event of Jupiter's ingress into Gemini. And let's look at some of the aspects that formed at that time. So as you can see, I've got the chart set for 6:15 p.m. Central Standard Time. And I'll just talk about some of the angles or conversations that were taking place in the heavens at the time that Jupiter entered Gemini. First thing to note is that Jupiter is in its detriment according to traditional astrology when it's in Gemini, because Jupiter rules the opposite sign of Sagittarius. So, but Jupiter is still a benefic. So Jupiter does not affect us as acutely as some of the other planets when they're in detriment. So, but let's look at what this means. Jupiter in Sagittarius is dealing with the law, it's dealing with what is perceived to be the overarching truth, it's dealing with some philosophy, it's dealing with a vision, an idea, it's long distance travel. Astrology is a language of symbolism. So it gives us a spectrum of contemplation. So just as Jupiter can be long distance travel, which that can literally be moving far away from home. I'm a Sagittarius rising, as I've stated before, and I trekked 1,100 miles away from home when I journeyed down here to Texas. So that was a literal representation of Sagittarius, long distance travel. But again, astrology is a language of symbolism. So that long distance travel can metaphorically represent vision, an idea that travels or sees far from where the person is who has the idea, as in we have a vision for the future or we are shooting towards some goal way down the road. And if you know Sagittarians, they typically have some big idea that they want to pursue. So these are some of the things, some of the energies around Sagittarius and Jupiter when he's in his domicile. Jupiter in Sagittarius is also higher learning. It's the teacher. It is what has been seen. And this is key because Jupiter in Gemini is looking. He's in the land of looking, not what I see, but I'm looking around for details, as in I'm the student, which is why I title this uh, from student, from teacher to student. That's why I gave that subtitle, because this is a great opportunity we have with Jupiter now in Gemini to expand the student in us. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So let's deal with the basics. First of all, Jupiter is the greater benefic, and Venus is considered to be the lesser benefic. They are still traveling together in the heavens. They're still holding hands. So, but they've moved from Earth to air. So the energy has lightened because air is light energy. Earth is very dense. So Jupiter moves very slowly in Taurus because Taurus is fixed earth energy. It is the epitome of fixed energy. Jupiter now is in a space where it's less compacted, there's less contraction, and there's a lot of open, literal air for it to move through. So we should be feeling the energy kind of lighten up some. And it's the two benefics together again. So, but the thing about when Jupiter and Venus are together is our appetites can increase. And that can literally be your appetite as far as food, but just your appetite for life in general. We want to be mindful of our pockets, our wallets, ladies, your purse, as far as your currency leaving from it, because it can expand that curiosity and we want to go and spend. It can leave us really wanting to indulge, desire, and delight. These are two things that really come to mind when we're talking about Venus and Jupiter. And that was especially the case while they were in Taurus, because Taurus especially deals with appetite and indulgence. But in Gemini, there's curiosity. And so it is more about, it could be a little more reckless because Gemini wants to explore. Oh, I want to try that. I'll try this. What about a little bit of that? So that's just a minor thing to keep in mind right now, to be, to kind of tame that energy. Too much of anything can be dangerous. Something else is that at the time of the ingress, we have Mercury at 14 of Taurus, and it's in a semi square to Neptune at 29 of Pisces. So there's the semi square. And again, a semi square is a 45-degree angle. It is not as harsh as a square, which is a 90-degree aspect, but it still brings some tension into the mix. So whenever we have a hard aspect between Mercury and Neptune, it can bring about delusion. It can bring about difficulty in communication. It can be deception. It can be lies. It can be hidden motives that we need to be careful about. Are our thoughts clear? Are we clear in our communication? Are we hearing things properly? Are we getting all the details? Are we being delusional in the way we communicate? Do we have some goals that are just completely ridiculous? And so that's part of that taming that very enthusiastic energy that we have with this conjunction between the sun in Gemini, Venus in Gemini, and Jupiter in Gemini. I mean, that's a beautiful conjunction. There's a lot of optimism, okay? And that's a great thing. I don't want to cast down this optimism with a cloud of negativity, but if you live life long enough, you know you always got to learn to have a little measure and carefulness around your optimism, because my parents used to say, don't count your chickens before they hatch, that type of thing. And with Mercury in this semi-square to Neptune, we may have a tendency towards that to get a little carried away. Oh, I can jump off that building and land on my feet and not break all of the bones in my lower legs. Sure, I can. So we want to be careful about that. What else did we have here? We have a semi-square too between Mars and the sun. Mars is at 19 of Aries, and the sun here at 5 of Gemini. So when we have a hard aspect between the sun and Mars, same thing we're thinking ego, ego, making sure we keep the ego in check. And that's important because, and I think I talked about this with the full moon video, because yes, we do have opportunities here. And for some of us, they are showing themselves, but it's like a game of poker. You got to be able to control your outward expression so that you don't blow this opportunity. You know, if you're sitting there with a great, I'm not a poker player, but let's say a straight, you got a straight and you know it should win. You don't want to get all giddy and oh yeah, it's on, you know, because this is not a game where you show what's in your hand. You have to stay even keel the whole time and uh stay engaged in the game. This is the time to stay engaged in the game. Don't let your ego get the best of you. Don't be delusional in ideas. Stay grounded. Mercury is going to help us with staying grounded because it's in Taurus, which is a more practical Mercury, but still it's in that, has that relationship with Neptune where it might get a little carried away. So it's just some things to keep in mind. The North Node is now at 13 degrees of Aries. And so, again, the nature of the ego is still under review because Jupiter is in a semi square. We got a lot of little semi squares here. Jupiter here is in a semi square to the North Node down here. So, let me erase some stuff so at least that aspect will show up. So, Jupiter here at 0 and the North Node down here at 13, they're in a semi square to each other. So again, this this is where Jupiter expands anything it touches. With the North Node of destiny, with its ruler Mars in its domicile, and Mars being in a semi square to the sun, it again comes back to this thing of not blowing up the scene and not risking the outcome that we intend on or looking to achieve by our egos getting out of check. Ego in check. That's the thing here. That's the thing. And there's this thing around humility because Jupiter, again, the teacher, is in the space of being the student. And the ego can be kept in check by allowing oneself to be open to new information, new data, new scenery. Jupiter is long distance travel. Gemini is short distance travel. So I use this analogy many times when I'm explaining this to my clients. My brother, God rest his soul, was a truck driver, and he would always tell me, "You got to read the traffic, because you know when you're driving a truck that is that size and carrying sometimes thousands of pounds of cargo, you got to be able to judge differently than your normal passenger vehicle. You got to know what's way down the road because you just can't slam on your brakes and stop all of a sudden. So it's being a truck driver requires a Sagittarian viewpoint as far as reading the traffic. Look way down the road. If you see those brake lights hitting a half mile up the road, you need to start throttling down now. Well, there's a caveat to that. You got to be careful to not always be looking so far down the road that a car jumps in front of you and you don't see it because your vision is too fixed down the road. Gemini reminds us that what's going on in our immediate vicinity is just as important as what is going on down the road. And if I can't handle right here in front of me or what's right around me, then I don't even have a chance to get down the road. So Jupiter in Gemini is a chance to exercise some humility by allowing ourselves to take on the mantle and the role and the curiosity of the child and the student. And with that said, let's get into some other a little deeper water here around this transit. So we're going to go back in time and we're going to go back to 1988, 1988 again. In 1988, Saturn and Uranus form a conjunction. They conjoin around every 42 years. And remember, as I spoke about in the video on the astrology of Black people, 1987, I talked about how Saturn deals with tradition, the old world. Uranus is looking towards the new world. In the mythology, Uranus is the father who is castrated by the son, Saturn. And symbolically, one way we can understand this is that time, there was an attempt by time to freeze itself or to maintain itself by preventing a future. The castration of Uranus by Kronos/Saturn is an attempt to prevent and eradicate the future. But in doing so, it still led to a future because Aphrodite, Venus, is born from the semen still leaving the phallus when Saturn tries to castrate his father, Uranus. So when these two get together, we tend to see an old world slam up against a new world. Now, the reason this is significant is because at this time, this same year, we also had Jupiter make its ingress into Gemini, 1988. So the thing I want to really highlight about this transit is that Jupiter moves in 12-year cycles. So that means wherever it's at one point, whatever sign it's in, 6 years later, it will be in the opposing sign because that will be halfway through its cycle. So that means 1988, it's in Gemini. 1994, 95, it's in Sagittarius. 2000, 2001, Jupiter is in Gemini. 2007, 2008, it's in Sagittarius. 2012, Jupiter in Gemini. 2018, Sagittarius. 2024, Jupiter is in Gemini. 2020, 2032, Jupiter is in Sagittarius. And we're going to walk through these decades and look at some things that I think are interesting because we can see things around law. Jupiter represents law. We can see how certain laws were being toyed with or introduced or rolled out in some form or fashion. And then when we get 6 years later, when Jupiter is in his domicile, then we see the actual law come down. In other words, we may see situations form when Jupiter is in Gemini that will lead to some new law. There are religious implications. Jupiter in Sagittarius is also religion. We see interesting things going on the religious forefront in 88 that would materialize into something else in 94. But either way, I'm just going to jump into this thing and we'll start chatting, and I may have to be grabbing some notes. I got some stuff here, and I'll be referring to it as we go along. Okay, so we're starting with 1988, and I'm going to refer back to the Ronald Reagan speech on the Drug Abuse Act of 1988 that I talked about in the Astrology of Black People 1987 video. So Reagan gives this speech in 88. Now, we know that looking back in time that he launched this war on drugs, and he even had quote unquote drug czar back then. I remember it. There was all this conversation about it. But I want to bring something to the fore that's interesting. That in 1988, then Senator John Kerry was chairman of the subcommittee on terrorism, narcotics, and international operations. And it's a subcommittee of the Committee on Foreign Relations. So that's the document. So John Kerry is the chairman of this. And again, let me read this: Subcommittee on Terrorism, Narcotics, and International Operations. Now, critical thinking here. It's interesting that the grouping of these terms that would fall under the focus and the umbrella of this committee, these are very wide ranging areas. You know, terrorism and then narcotics. Now, each one of those is engulfing by itself, but we're going to tackle all of this. We're going to be looking at terrorism, narcotics, and international operations. Now, I want you to remember what I said. When Jupiter is in Gemini, it can be introductory steps, laying the foundation for new laws that will come about. And the fact that these three subheadings are all positioned under one umbrella, we then have to be thinking throughout history things that happen. Possibly we want to go back to the fact that under this subcommittee umbrella focus, that they were all grouped together. Now, some things you got to put two and two together for yourself. Now, let's look at some of the members of this committee. First name, Joseph R. Biden of Delaware. Paul S. Sarbanes, Alan Cranston, Christopher Dodd. I remember Christopher Dodd. John Kerry, Paul Simon. That's a well-known name. Terry Sanford from my home state. I remember Terry Sanford. Brock Adams, Daniel Moynihan. I remember him. Jesse Helms. He was a North Carolina senator. Richard Lugar, Nancy Kassebaum. I remember her. Rudy Boschwitz, Larry Pressler, Frank Murkowski, Paul Tribal, Daniel Evans, and a young senator named Mitch McConnell. They were all on this committee. Now what's interesting, you go back and look at some of these old news programs where Kerry's coming on and he's laying the heat down like we're not doing enough to fight these drugs. And I'm seeing how crack is ravishing our inner cities, and it's very interesting. He's given a lot of pushback. And then at this time, there's this controversy that is coming to light around the Iran Contra issues, dealing with Ollie North, who became the fall guy. Now, let's jump to 1994. And we're going to come back to 88, but I want to jump just to juxtapose this. So Reagan comes out with his speech in 88. John Kerry is the chairman of this committee, and he's pushing 1994. When Jupiter is in Sagittarius, here's the response. This is the Clinton administration. Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act of 94 that was sponsored by Joe Biden. Also in 94, I remember this, came out on HBO. I think I was either a junior or senior in high school, Banging in Little Rock. Those of y'all who are around my age, I know you remember when Banging in Little Rock came out, 1994. Everything is connected. So to help, possibly, well, maybe it's just happenstance, but possibly the timing of the release of this program would help to solidify the legislation that is introduced the same year. And if you know anything about this and you had people in your family do time, which I did, I had people who caught time in the mid 90s. And the whole thing that we all talked about and heard about, man, you got to do 85%. You got to do that time. And we all know too about the infamous disparity in the classification between powder cocaine and rock cocaine, meaning you would get the same amount of time or more for having a gram of rock cocaine that you would have for 10 grams of powder. And it was obvious the targeting with this bill, who it was targeting, what demographic, what ethnicity and nationality was being targeted. At this time, NAFTA goes into full effect. So in 88, there's all of this pushback around whether Mexico should be certified or decertified, as basically saying that they are working in conjunction with America's, the U.S. Their best interests. And so Kerry is talking about all the issues with the cartel and how Mexico has got to work more vigorously to support the efforts of stopping the drugs from coming across the border. So you have this pushback in 88, but interestingly, that as this legislation comes down, NAFTA goes through, or it's like, hey, we're locking arms with Canada and Mexico. Previously, it was the U.S. and Canada. Now it's the whole North American continent. All right. In 88, you have the televangelist scandals. You got Jimmy Swaggart. You got Jim and Tammy Baker. I mean, I remember this stuff. I have sinned against you. I remember that, man. We were clowning. Uh, Jim and Tammy Baker, all that controversy with them. And you had a war going on, battling for turf within Christianity. You had the established brick and mortar churches that were basically going to war with what they call the independent preachers. And so there was this whole group with Baker, Swaggart, they were offshoots of Oral Roberts, and Oral Roberts is an offshoot of Billy Graham. But either way, Swaggart and Baker and these guys and Robert Tilton and there were some others. They were kind of like the renegades. Okay. Remember, in 88, Saturn and Uranus are conjunct. You've got the old guard coming up against the new guard. So the televangelists represent the Uranus aspect. They're like, man, we're breaking free from the rudimentary. We're not gonna sit in the church and wait on the people. We're going to get this money. We're going to get the bag. And so the established preachers are like pushing back, like, man, they messing with our bag. So some people believe that they had a war going on. That's how Swaggart and these others got jammed up because the bottom line is they all were crooks. They all had dirty laundry, but they said, well, we got to go after these boys because they moving in on our turf. What's interesting is that those scandals that happened while Jupiter's in Gemini would then give birth to a new wave of prosperity gospel that would become more fixed by 94. You got to think Swaggart, Baker, and the like in 88. They were kind of like the forerunners. But by the mid 90s, now you got a new crop of heavy hitters. Creflo Dollar, Kenneth Copeland, Joyce Meyer, T.D. Jakes, Paula White. All of these, they cut their teeth and they come into prominence in the 90s. So here's another example of Jupiter is studious in Gemini. He's testing the water. And then whatever is testing, whatever works becomes fixed, so to speak, when he ends up in his domicile 6 years later. It's interesting stuff. 2000. Here's some interesting things. In 2000, the UK passes the Terrorism Act. John Kerry was on the subcommittee on terrorism, narcotics, and international operations. I don't know if the two are relatable, but there's a lot of activity in Yemen at this time. Now, what I found about Yemen is that supposedly it served, I don't know if that's past or present tense, primarily as a transit country for drugs coming from such countries as Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran, and the Gulf states. Hmm. In music news, UGK and Project Pat, and I'm not going to get into a lot of the hip hop because I'm saving that for something new I got coming around this stuff too. But I got to do this one. 2000, UGK and Project Pat come out. No, UGK and 3-6 Mafia. No, 3-6 Mafia featuring UGK and Project Pat. They're coming out with sipping on some scissor. Now I know a lot of y'all remember that if you are from the hip hop world, if you're from the South, sipping on some scissor, sip, sip. Okay. Why is this matter? Because Jupiter is testing the water in Gemini. There's a transition now happening in 2000 where we're moving away from crack and it is moving into the opioid era. Okay. 2007, 2008. What do we remember about 2007? Pimp C dies. Pimp C of UGK. And supposedly he ODs on what we call in the South drank. Drank with an A, not an I. Drank is codeine, promethazine. It's basically a opioid cocktail. So sipping on some scissor herb comes out in 2000. And it just so happens that one of the key performers in that song, when Jupiter is in Sagittarius years later, he succumbs to what that song was basically introducing to the culture. That same year, '07, '08, the UK Counterterrorism Act is enacted. So Jupiter and Sagittarius, the first act, and then with Jupiter and Gemini, we have the Terrorism Act. Jupiter and Sagittarius, the Counterterrorism Act. It's very interesting. And we also know what happened in 2001, September 11th. And we see little speckles here throughout this period, these time periods of things dealing with terror, things dealing with narcotics and foreign relations. It's interesting stuff. 2012, in Afghanistan, we have suicide bombing that kills 41 at a mosque. Pakistan, we have what is supposedly the second in command in Al Qaeda is killed. Yemen, a suicide bomber kills more than 90. And interestingly, in 2012, fentanyl deaths are on the rise in 2012. And what's interesting too is that the same year, Future comes out with a song called Tony Montana. And some would say that this, if not the beginning, it's very close to the beginning of the whole mumble rap, if you want to call that genre of hip hop. And the mumbling is anybody who knows about, you know, people in that life, when you own certain things, that kind of nodding out and then nodding back and that's what the that rap is reminiscent of. Somebody nodding in and out of consciousness and on abusing certain substances. So that year, fentanyl deaths are on the rise, and it just so happens that mumble rap emerges. From 2000 to 2018, remember 2000, Jupiter and Gemini, 2018, Jupiter and Sagittarius. The number of opioid deaths grew eightfold, reaching almost 50,000. 2018, the rapper Mac Miller dies of an overdose, and it's believed that he took a cocktail and part of what it contained, opioids. The same year, 2018, the series on Netflix is released called Altered Carbon. And if you know anything about it, there's an episode where this guy's in the city. It looks like your typical New York or Chicago type city of the future, and every drug you want is available. He even has something he can do. He can take his some eye drops and put it in his eyes, and he gets high off of that. So it's very interesting when you look at, man, when you start looking at astrology and history together, that's the game changer. In a perfect world, history and astrology would be taught in tandem in schools. Because when you look at energy along with the events, it's some real head scratching that goes on because it's hard to not see correlations. So I want to refer to an article I found online. It's called Addict Rap: The Shift from Drug Distributor to Drug Consumer in Hip Hop. And I want to read a couple of things. In 2000, Purple Drink, a concoction of prescription medicines, was introduced to mainstream hip hop. The genre has seemingly always had a relationship with drug content. Earlier hip hop artists glorified upward financial mobility of selling drugs, whereas some contemporary artists exploit achievements via the consumption of drugs. In other words, there has been a cultural shift from being the drug distributor to drug consumer in hip hop. Now, I want to read that. The profundity of this, I want you to catch. In other words, there has been a cultural shift from being the drug distributor to drug consumer in hip hop. So when crack rolls out, we see 87, 88 that hip hop starts to shift to more and more a focus on what I got and the criminality, the ability to have the drugs and to distribute them, and then to be able to have financial gain and material gain based on me selling the drugs. And by the time we get up to present, it's more about being the consumer of the drugs. We're seeing it, we're living in it. Then it talks about Pimp C. It says in December 2007, Texas based rapper Chad Pimp C Butler died in the West Hollywood Hotel. According to the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office, the combination of codeine and promethazine found in the rapper's system, coupled with the sleep disorder apnea, caused his death. Now, we don't know if that is true, but that's what the report says. Now, it does talk about 3 6 Mafia's release of sipping on some scissor, but I want to read this part. It says research suggests there has been growing use and consumption of pharmaceutical drugs such as codeine, promethazine, dextromethorphan, and diphenhydramine because the drug is legally obtainable, free of cost of medical insurance, and perceived as safe. Despite public perception and feelings of euphoria and enhanced awareness by consumers, the drug has potential harmful side effects such as hallucination, drowsiness, dry mouth, blurred vision, deafness, lightheadedness, agitation, confusion, dizziness, disturbed coordination, headaches, insomnia, vertigo, serious brain damage, and addiction. Licensed to Pill, an article written by DJ and producer A-Track, calls out hip hop artists for their overuse and representation of hard drugs. He does not condemn the lyrics, but criticizes artists for not having an open discussion about the effects of these substances. A-Track claims rap has reached the psychedelic age and says, quote, rap went from glorifying selling drugs to glamorizing their effects. And beneath the surface, there may be a profound lack of understanding of these substances, end quote. There was something else I wanted to talk about. Yeah, here it is. They're going back to a guy who named Robert Merton, who wrote an article in 1938 titled Social Structure and Animi. And it says it provides an outline for various social adaptations which signify the schisms between goals and means in society. While critiqued by other social scientists as not broad enough or too limiting, Merton's analysis provides a framework to discuss the shift in hip hop culture from being a drug distributor to a drug consumer. According to Merton, there are 5 social adaptations that guide individuals' adoption of cultural values. Adaptation 2, innovation, shows a rupture between the culture goals and institutionalized means, whereas Merton states, quote, be it noted that where frustration derives from the inaccessibility of effective institutional means for attaining economic or any other type of highly valued success, end quote. In other words, in communities where resources are scarce or opportunities are few, individuals might have to resort to alternative freestyle lifestyles to achieve and obtain their means, i.e., success. So, And they're saying a frequent example of this adaptation is of the drug dealer, who is an individual without any conventional options to achieve their means of success. Now, then this is compared to adaptation four, known as retreatism. Retreatism is a rejection of both goals and means in society. A primary example of this type of person would be that of a drug addict. This person has given up on trying to appeal to institutionalized standards or being seen as someone that wants to move up the ladder of achievement. While new artists embrace drug consumption culture, are not, this thing was not proofread. There's words missing. While new artists embrace it should be of drug consumption culture, are not fully a retreatist. I don't know. I'm just going to read it. While new artists embrace drug consumption culture, are not fully a retreatist because they profit monetarily, they do embody aspects of this fourth adaptation by rejecting conventional norms towards drug use and embracing narcotics as part of their identity. Therefore, drug consumption rap becomes a mesh of Merton's innovative and retreatist adaptations, which produces new ways to understand both goals and means in contemporary society. On one hand, there is an embrace of cultural goals, for example, success/wealth, while on the other, there is rejection of institutional means, for example, drug abstinence/obedience. So, in a nutshell, what has happened here is a cause and effect situation has been set up, but is not governed by the people who are living out this thing. If you don't have the ability right now to be consciously aware of yourself in life and in this world, you through dealing. You are through dealing. So if you take the route of I'm going to do whatever I got to do to get money, get rich or die trying, then you're going to take the adaptation to the innovation. But by putting yourself in this situation, you immediately put yourself in the line of fire with a potential karmic destiny of adaptation for retreatism, which could mean that I just eventually give up on life itself. I ain't trying to hit any goals. I don't care about any social norms. I just need to get high. But all of it is set up by an outside entity. And we can see if you go back to when I pulled up the chart for when Reagan gives a speech on the Drug Abuse Act, Scorpio is on the ascendant. Pluto is in Scorpio. So there's possibly hidden motives and it's on the it's on the horizon. It's rising. So what I want to accomplish, I want to put as the rising sign. Now, we have to consider that maybe we're living in something that has been well thought out, well designed, well studied. You know, you go back and listen to old episodes of Art Bell and you hear some of these guests. There's a guy named Russell Targ who I don't know if he's still living, but he was a remote viewing instructor and author. And he talks about these there's retrocognition, being able to put the mind in the future and then work your way back. So if someone's being paid to study these things, if the people gathering this information possibly have ill intent, then what if there's any validity to this stuff, it could be used for very nefarious purposes to look into the future, not just with astrology and the other sciences that where we can forecast, but if there are ways to project the mind into the future and then look back to now, so that I can see the potential of what I do now. That's a little unnerving. The whole thing of remote viewing and then remote influence. Is there a way to influence situations or people from a remote position? And we know how quantum physics has come to verify the possibility because we have non locality. Astrology shows us that non locality is actually a real thing. How is it that a planet billions of miles away can have an effect on our lives here? Because the distance means nothing. The energy permeates all distances. There is no distance when it comes to energy, which leads us up to 2024. That if man has been contemplating these things, and now every time you get on the internet, there's an ad for AI generated information, AI generated text, AI generated voices and images. Oh, it's so cool. You don't have to do anything. Then it makes you wonder about, with this seeming to increase now around the time that we have Jupiter moving uh, now in Gemini, what might that be leading us to in 2032 or in 2030 when Jupiter arrives in Sagittarius? And at the time of this arrival, we have all the big boys are now in expressive energies. They're either in air or fire. By 2030, Neptune is in Aries, Pluto is on its way in Aquarius, Saturn is in Aries, Uranus is in Gemini. This whole thing that we're just kind of kicking about AI and the possibilities, everything's so cool right now. Maybe we really see where this thing has been building up to, as in what's been the goal. And all of these are precursors to the next Saturn Uranus conjunction, which comes 2 years later in 2032. The old world is buttressed up against the new world. The old religion is buttressed up to a new one that we, and religion is the binding. A new binding emerges, new learning, some things. And I know I'm kind of m- moving around things in a circular manner. I would imagine that I attract people who are intelligent and who have the ability to connect dots. Okay. But I will say this, that the level of globalization that is approaching is climactic. It is a crescendo. It's a moment of ultimate reality that is approaching in this 2030 2032 window. So while Jupiter is in Gemini, be the best student you can be, because the things you learn now may very well be a pivotal point for your bloodline. We're talking about humanity as we have known it could be coming to a crossroad. It's coming to a crossroad. And it's obvious. It's obvious for those who have eyes to see. It is obvious. It's so subtle and so simple as this. People drive through a parking lot and have no regard for human life. See, now I know that sounds moralistic, but you got to think how subtle change happens. It's subtle. It happens within the actual people. The people are losing their humanity. They're becoming the robots. You don't have to worry about the robots out there. It's the humans who are becoming zombies. At my children's school, they have end of the year awards, and some of the parents are parked on the school property. So at before school lets out, they line all the parents up to pick up the students. So some of the parents are leaving from the awards thing and they're speeding through the parking lot. at the school where their own babies go to school. There's no regard for the fact that a child might randomly dart out somewhere. Children don't think. A child could dart out at any time, but they're not thinking like humans. They're thinking like automatons. They're not thinking about anybody else. And they're driving a 2,000-pound machine that can eradicate life. They're driving through the neighborhood they live in, where their house is located, like a maniac. You go in the store, I go in Walmart, I'm looking for some little folders for some of this, my teaching tools I'm going to be distributing. And I ask a woman and I say, "Excuse me, ma'am." She doesn't say, "Yes, sir," or "Hi, how can I help you?" She just looks at me with that, "What the fuck do you want?" look. Now I'm thinking, "You ignorant motherfucker." And I'm cordial to you and I ask you, you getting paid to be here. No humanity, automatons. And these same people, when this thing comes down, will be out here crying, talking about they ain't paying us and we deserve to have a job. And but while you in this moment, look how you act. It's the subtle things that are happening where we're losing our humanity and not seeing how we're being shifted moment by moment, day by day into machines. So those of you, this is a plea, who still have a mind, a functioning mind and a soul. You see all these things behind me? Buy them now. If you haven't, go watch the book of Eli. These things going to be a thing of the past. I've been saying it for 10 years. Go and get literature. Make sure you have some knowledge stored. Go watch the movie Idiot. I'm about to read you off some movies. You need to watch the Book of Eli. Go watch the Black Mirror series. Watch Helix. Get the DVD set. Get Fringe DVD set. Watch the Divergent, Insurgent, Allegiant series. Idiocracy, Altered Carbon, and that's just a few. Dark City. I mean, you can go on and on and on. We're at that point. If you have creators who are really putting out content that is edifying and is feeding you, support them. Support them. If you have knowledge to provide to the collective, stop bullshitting because we live in a pool of water and your contribution in this time where Jupiter is expanding the mind for learning. The teacher is the student. And any teacher who does not allow him or herself to be an ongoing student is full of shit. Anybody who can't shift their perspective and allow themselves to learn and grow is counterproductive to the evolutionary process that we are engaged in. Buy books, build your library, allow for change in perspective and opinion. Higher learning is dependent on primary education, meaning all those degrees come back to kindergarten, first grade, second grade. That's where the foundation is laid. Miss Teal, my first grade teacher, said, when you're taking your shower, make sure you let the water run under your fingernails. I'm 47 years old. I still remember that shit. Citizenship, that's what it was part of. The simple stuff. That's where we at now. We're going back to the minute details. We're learning how to learn. That's the energy of Jupiter and Gemini. Our educational system is crumbling. You see it all around. They're closing schools in Fort Worth. I saw it on the news. They're closing schools in Irving. Pay attention to what's going on around you. you may have to teach your children, which is why you need to have your own library. You need to be teaching them anyway. If they're at school, they had to go through that for whatever, but you come home and if you got to unlearn some stuff that they picked up at school, you need to have the tools to teach them real American history, for one. So each person will be that much more responsible for their own learning. Seek out competent teachers who move in integrity. Now, I know I've been on my soapbox, so I'm going to conclude with this. In 2012, I went back to college. I went back to school. So in 95, I graduated high school. I go to college on a full 4-year scholarship for football. I wilded out while I was in school. I did a lot of crazy things. And by the time 99 got here, I go back home with nothing to show for. Nothing. Thankfully, by 2002, I moved down here to Texas. By 2004, I got my own business going. I had gotten myself in shape in those first 2 years. By 2004, I started GymWorks, my personal training business. By 2006, I had my own gym. Blew up, and my ego blew up too. So by 2011, 2012, the business has crashed and I'm having to rethink life. Remember, 2012, Jupiter is in Gemini. I'm a Sagittarius rising. So now, me, who in life I typically present as the philosopher and the teacher, I had to make a business decision, a life decision. It's time for I had to remake myself. I went back to school. Plus, I knew I could get that Pell Grant. Went back to school, and now I'm hungry because I'm not a child anymore. I can't go in bullshit. At this time, I'm like 36. I got 2 children. I'm divorced. Got to rebuild my life. I told um my current wife, I told her at that time, I said, I'm going to study myself into a new career. And I wasn't talking about the school. I was talking about my school at home. I didn't know what that career was going to be. I said, I'm going to study myself into a new career. So life became very ritualized back then. The ritual was to give in to the learning, although I didn't know exactly where it was going to land me. So it was perfect timing for me to go back to school in 2012. And school was just a metaphor for me rebuilding my life. I had to go back to the school of life. I had to humble myself. The beauty of making it to this age is you have some things to reflect on and you have some things to share. This is not stuff I'm pulling out of thin air. When I'm talking to my clients, I have things to share out of being through shit. Experience means you've been through some shit and you learn some things the hard way. But thankfully, if you live long enough, you now have the experience and the learning from the experience, which then becomes wisdom. Allow yourself to be humble, and you'll really see just how great you can be. I ain't trying to sound cliche like Les Brown or nothing, but straight up, allow yourself to unlearn some stuff over this next year by Jupiter's in Gemini. See what you can learn. Tabula rasa, is that what they say? Blank tablet, blank slate. See what you can be. Private readings. I'm available through my website, 720astrology.com. Know the stars to know yourself. Peace.